All right, good evening, everybody, or afternoon, early evening, I suppose. Early, yeah. I'd like to call this November 10th Policy Committee meeting to order. And I do see that we have some people here. Is that not on here? In this order? Oh, no, yeah, it is on public comment. So we have some public comment. Feel free. Do you want to start with you?
Oh, I thought it was in order for the agenda and then public comment after policies. I don't have anything.
Oh, is it on the-
Yeah, my public comments at the end of your agenda.
Not on a policy that's for consideration today?
Well, the way I read the agenda was that there was a comment on the agenda, but then at the end, it made it seem like that's when then the public would comment on the proposed changes.
If you have a comment on an agenda item, so a policy that's on the agenda for today, it's at the beginning. And then if you have a comment on a policy that's not on the agenda today, then that's when it'll be at the end.
Okay,
Well, either way.
I can do that.
Awesome.
Okay, so you ready for me?
I'm ready.
Okay, now, am I timed for 3 minutes on this one, or can this be discretionary? I mean, I should be able to go fast.
You're
It's
good.
just, okay. I just wanted to state that I was disappointed that I didn't receive a response to my email. I went back and made sure that I was offered to ask questions, suggestions, comments. Make sure that I did not mishear that, and I haven't received a response to your email yet, so I was a little disappointed in that. As far as what I saw, some of the pending changes already, I do see that you took into consideration that, legal reference for the suspension of students, JKD. As far as adding additional clarification for hearing procedures, I didn't see that in there. Perhaps it's going to be in the future. You've got hearing procedures on the website, but there's nothing to link it to the board policy manual. The first reference when you search the keyword hearing is in policy JIA for the students to write, but beyond that, it does not describe what goes into the hearing process. It does on the student services page, I think that Christy's a member of, Christine's a member of, but kind of outlines the hearing process. But I feel like somehow it should link to the board manual, because in the parent-student handbook, it also says the board manual sets the precedence over the handbooks and manuals. So maybe in the future that can be taken into consideration and somehow get that written into the actual board policy manual. As far as the consideration for the conference attendance and witness requirements, I still feel strongly that there should be at least 2 neutral parties in that conference that is required between the principal and the student for the suspension. Unless there is some kind of surveillance camera with audio in the room that I just don't know about, that the parents don't know about to capture that. I think for safety and security of the student as well as the principal, there should be other witnesses in that room. Written record, and perhaps this is a more behind the scenes in an administrator handbook, perhaps, or like procedure manual on what qualifies as a written record. I thought that should have been clarified and not just taken for granted. Okay, a written record is obviously something you write down or perhaps upload, and you don't have to, I'm not passing this around, but this, with the school I experienced, were considered written records. It's sloppy and unprofessional. Torn out of a planner and then OneNote. So I do think that written records need to be defined, perhaps not in the manual, but somewhere else where administrators know exactly what to do. It sounds like there's that PowerSchool incident management system. That's where I've received disciplinary referrals from. That's where I've received positive behavioral referrals from. It seems like that's the intended system of record where these written records should go. And then if there's a FOIA record request, or if somebody needed it for an educational record, the administrator can log into the incident management system and print out the written record. So again, maybe it doesn't necessarily need to be in the manual, but it needs to be somewhere else so the administrators know what qualifies as a written record. Let's see, in addition to that, and again, perhaps this was taken out just because it was more behind the scenes procedure, but I recommended to not remove that the principal report the suspensions to the superintendent. that should be used as a mechanism, as an internal control and risk management for any of the required disclaimers language per the board policy manual, per the South Carolina Code of Law, or even any federal statutory authorities that need to be referenced in there. And I had commented, it's as simple as an Excel spreadsheet, or I'm sure y'all have access to all these different Microsoft Power, automated systems where it could feed in. And then perhaps the superintendent, or it'd be very reasonable for him to delegate this task to somebody else, would go in and check. Okay, did the principal on the suspension or this expulsion notice, is everything checked off? If it's not, why? We need to hold that administrator accountable. Why did you not do this? And I mean, I guess obviously the answer would be more training, but they need to be held responsible. And if it's missing anything that was required, then that student needs to be, since there was a wrongdoing, there needs to be reconsideration immediately for whatever the situation was, because they potentially were denied something that they should have been told. And then, let's see. The notification of suspension by phone. I saw that it was going to be moved after the suspension, but my recommendation was prior to the day of suspension. I think it's in there now, as every effort should be maintained, every effort to make contact with the parent on the day of the suspension. But I think we need to consider, and we have to, because I'm sure it could happen, situations of a 6-year-old being suspended. They don't know any better. They'll go home. Perhaps they don't tell their parent, because it sounds like at this point, the parent has no idea that the student's been suspended. No written notification has gone out. No call has been made. Well, what if a grandparent, or they get on the bus and they go to school the next day, they show up at school, they're suspended. And the school's like, what are you doing here? And then they have to call their parent, and the parent never received a notification. So I think it needs to happen prior to the actual effective date of suspension. Or let's say you have a high schooler that, still maintains on mom and dad. They get them to school and they just simply don't tell them, they don't want to get caught or embarrassed or get in trouble. So they think maybe they can slide. But they show up at school, and then the administrators are like, what are you doing here? Call the parent, I have no idea. I haven't gotten the written mail, haven't gotten an email, haven't gotten, in person. I wasn't called, like a call several days prior to the suspension. I think it's just common courtesy, and I think it would be warranted. So I was disappointed to see that now it's just every effort on the day of the suspension, when we need to think about other circumstances, like what are we gonna do when a suspended student shows up at the school and the parent has no idea, because they haven't received the written notification via mail that gets mailed out on the day of the suspension. And then they haven't gotten a call on the day of the suspension. So I think that needs to be considered. As far as the 3 options for the delivery notice, and again, this is perhaps one that doesn't need to be written into the manual, but other things to think about. Now, if we're going to offer 2 additional methods of notifying the parents of the suspension, what's out there right now is the regular mail to be mailed on the day of the suspension. If we're going to have that as an option, perhaps make it certified so we have proof of delivery. What if it's returned? And I would hope that most parents would be responsible enough to report to the school that, hey, we moved, we have a new address. That needs to be taken into consideration. Email, if the email address is outdated and it gets returned undeliverable to the school, I think somebody would say, okay, we need to do some research. Obviously, they can do them by email. Let's give them a call. Let's give a legal guardian, a parent, a call to make sure. And also at the same time, let's get a good email address on file for you. And then if we're considering doing a hand delivered, I'm assuming that's probably on school grounds and not taking it to their house. But we're going to need to think about maintaining some sort of proof that it was that notification that was delivered to the parent. So ID is going to need to be checked. I would say parental signature, some kind of acknowledgement, whether they have a spreadsheet or whether they sign it, make a copy real fast, give it back to the parent acknowledging I received this via hand delivery. Or I mean, even the use of a surveillance camera to approve, well, you were here and we handed it to you and you signed it. Just some things to consider as far as verifying without a doubt that that is the parent or legal guardian that's being given that notification via hand delivery. I had questions, but I know questions can't be addressed. I did state the consideration for appeals or for appeals. Now you're gonna have to provide clarification as to 5 school days, to get that appeal process over to the superintendent. I did not think that was fair. I did not agree with it, considering in my circumstance, I was not even given a school day. And this was after I was told that no appeals process existed. I was told that by the principal. I had to spend my holiday weekend researching the board manual, South Carolina Code of Law. Finally was able to get in touch with the superintendent. He said, he emailed me 3:34 p.m. You have till 8 a.m. to get me everything you need. Even after I told him I was waiting on information from the school, and they were outside of their guideline. I had 48 hours to respond to me, nobody ever did it. So with that consideration, I think 5 days is too generous, and I think it needs to be pulled back into 2 days for fairness. You have two day, he has a 2-day review to make his decision. I think the parents or students should have a 2 school day window to gather all of their information. I think that's fair. That's what the disciplinary matrix tool and this progressive disciplinary plan is all about. Fidelity, accountability, transparency, quality. I don't think it's fair. 2 days, I think is considerable and fair. Let's see. And then I know in the last policy meeting, it was pointed out that in JKD, there is a small section about being able to petition to the board, but it doesn't go into any detail, like how you do it, who do you contact, is there a distribution list that it goes to, how many days do you have? And now it is in there, the superintendent should, in his written letter, if you don't agree with his decision, be able to petition to the board. It sounds like that is new now, that it's going to be required to be in that writing. And my comment was, I don't think it's fair to then change this policy when we're almost halfway through the school year, unless it's going to be retroactive. So now am I going to be given the opportunity to appeal to the board? I mean, his body of his email nor his written notification informed me that I had a right to petition to the board. So that, as far as, again, if this is going to be, I don't think it's fair to introduce a new or to expand upon a policy in the middle of the school year. All of this should have been considered prior to this new progressive discipline plan and the matrix tools being put out there. Everything that has to do with disciplinary, whether it's warnings, suspensions, expulsions, everything should be considered at once. And those are my comments.
I appreciate your comments.
Okay.
You sure?
Yes.
I was just gonna ask, you said you had some additional questions. You're gonna submit them in writing?
Yes.
I did send them in writing. I didn't receive a response.
We met and I think it was miscommunication between us on whether I was gonna respond or she was gonna respond. And so I think after we reviewed her email and the possibility of the changes, you were there. I guess I just kind of assumed she had responded and vice versa, so.
I guess you forwarded it to her because I didn't include it on my original email.
I understand. Yes, I apologize if there was miscommunication
No,
on that. I'm happy to chat
And I
after
did ask
about
her,
some of the comments that were shared.
So,
What was my question?
I will go
Thank
back and review the email.
I appreciate it.
Check into it.
all right, Ms. Graham, now that there is no other public comment, I will turn over you to start the policies.
Thank you. So I understand that on our agenda today, we had policy GCF, GCFR, GCQF, and GCQFR. for review. However, I understand that we are going to hold those over until a further policy meeting before we present those to the policy committee.
Correct.
So we are going to begin today with GCOA, which is evaluation of instructional staff. It was recommended that there would be updates to this policy in line with the Educators Assistance Act, as well. It had not been updated since 2013. And so you can see there are some significant updates here. It does bring it in line with our process, and Ms. Curley, who oversees our evaluation process. Unfortunately, I don't think could be here today, but did review it and felt that it reflected our current process. I know we do have some of our personnel team here who are happy to answer any questions that you all might have about the changes here.
Do you mind just going over briefly?
Sure.
Changes are.
Yes, so really, there was just some clarification about ADEPT being used in accordance with SCDE procedures. And then ADEPT is the evaluation tool that is used. And then additional clarification on the types of contracts and types of teachers. So a teacher who is new to the state or coming in from a private school where they had not previously been evaluated using ADEPT versus teachers coming in from other districts where they have had a previous ADEPT evaluation, teachers coming in from charter schools, and teachers who hold certain types of certificates like limited professional certificates or who are on the letter of agreement, international teachers, et cetera. So there's just clarification for each one of those categories of instructors as to how and when they will be evaluated. And that is added here to bring more clarity because that is something that a lot of people have had questions on how they will be evaluated given their status in different circumstances. And that is the significant changes. Then there's the addition of the paragraph that ADEPT will be used to inform personnel decisions, which has already been included in several other policies, but is stated here explicitly since this policy is about the use of the ADEPT process. I don't know if our personnel team has anything else that they spotted in there. I know that was a very quick summary of a lot of changes. If you have specific questions.
Very helpful.
Scrivener's there. First paragraph should be 2 approved as well. 2 got deleted.
Thank you. Extra deletion. I will add that back. Thank you. Any other questions about that?
Does anybody else have any questions? Okay, all right.
Thank you, Ms. Beck. Forward to first reading. We also have GCOAR, which is the accompanying administrative rule. It is very long, although most of it you will see is actually deleted of previous information that was there. It was very outdated and not, I suppose, reflective of the current process. And so this is an updated explanation of the process. It talks about the different types of contracts that teachers can have, and then how they will be evaluated based on each type of contract they have. And then plans for anyone who needs improvement based on their evaluation. And if our personnel department has anything else, I know the evaluations are a very specific area that I do not personally delve into very often. And so I'm happy to let our personnel department answer any questions that anybody has about how that looks exactly.
Is this from the model or was this like district? Okay, so
this is everything in the rule is from the model. There were no district recommendations to changes from the model.
do we feel like that sufficiently covers what we do as a district as far as our operation?
This is a question, then I forget. When did they go into a continuing contract? Is it after 3 years? Or is that the first year?
So, induction year is the first year, but induction could actually be more than 1 year. It's possible for an induction teacher. The typical path is induction, then annual, then continuing. If they successfully complete induction, successfully complete annual, and then they could go. So 2 years, and then they could, in the third year, they could be on a continuing contract. However, there are times where sometimes the induction teacher needs another year of induction. You can actually do induction for, I believe, up to 3 years. And then also annual, sometimes folks need another year of annual to get through that may be one thing that they need to continue to work on need to go through that process again. So it just depends, but the quickest route would be that third year, but it could be up to, 3 to 5 years, depending on the situation.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was taking up.
Any other questions on that?
I'm good, thank you.
Okay, we will move that forward to first reading for the next board meeting. Next up is policy ECA security. This is a policy that had now been updated since 2002, is being updated to reflect the change in the statute regarding proprietary security personnel, as well as some other changes to bring it up to date. You'll see that most of the changes are relatively minor, including allowing his or her designee for tasks that are assigned to the principal, including contacting law enforcement in the case of emergency. And then you will see there about halfway down the first page, the addition of the information regarding the proprietary security business, and then a legal reference to that statute.
All right.
When we get them.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Graham.
We will move that one forward for first reading. Next up, we have policy JKD, suspension of students. This is one that was reviewed at the previous policy meeting. We did receive comments as was suggested here in our public comment. And so there were some changes made to this. On the policy, you will see the change that was specifically made was in regard to actually, I apologize. I want to make sure that I'm saying the right one on policy versus that. In the policy, the specific change was the addition of the legal reference to IDEA, which is referenced earlier.
JKD.
JKD. It was referenced earlier in the policy saying that whenever a student who is classified as having a disability under IDEA commits a suspendable offense, the principal or his or her designee shall ensure that all provisions of IDEA are complied with. And so we did include a legal reference to IDEA there. There are some things that I'm happy to talk about as we look at the administrative rule as well. But in terms of, well, I'll say that all that for the policy, I'll say the rest. That's the only proposed change.
Do we classify, so when we talk about suspension of a student, because I think you can have a suspension in the school, correct?
Correct.
And then we can also have like a transportation related, so you could be suspended from transportation. What's word looking for? You'd be suspended from transportation based on, are those considered different types of suspensions?
So the policy, it defines suspension as being exclusion from school or school activities. So transportation would be included in that, but in the policy, we did define sort of some of the differences between out of school suspension and in school suspension. We did not get into the transportation piece as that would generally be covered by this. But we
I guess what I'm asking, is that considered a quote unquote, if we suspend somebody's transportation privileges, is that, so we consider transportation privilege. If we suspend them from that privilege, is that quote unquote considered a suspension that would go through this process?
Yes, based on the definition that is a school activity that they are excluded from.
But that would be the single thing, the only thing they
Like,
would.
I can see other, I
Correct.
think about extracurricular activities, if someone's suspended from
Right.
football games, then they go
Yeah.
through this process,
Well,
so.
because I guess you're right, because if you're suspended from transportation, I mean, you're still attending school.
Right.
Technically, you still would be allowed to attend extracurricular activities,
Right.
right? I mean,
Yes, but you would be
but
provided the
procedure,
same
the
rights
policy,
procedurally
right,
and the
yeah,
same
okay.
opportunity to appeal.
this is yeah, I see.
Yeah, I guess it doesn't make sense, because you could really get into some rabbit holes of trying to,
Yes, there are a lot
every
of-
single scenario, you're never gonna be able to do that, so.
Yeah, so we are gonna have a recommendation on the rule regarding the appeal
Yes.
process, correct?
Okay.
To kind of narrow that.
Yes, do you want me to just address the
Yeah,
rule?
can you
before we
just-
move
yeah,
those forward?
Yeah, let's
Sure.
do that.
Yes. So the administrative rule was also presented last time, and we do have some proposed changes to that. And I apologize because one of those changes was not made in the copy that was uploaded for the board. So the first change is in the first paragraph. There is a reference to a hearing there. That is a quote from the state statute. However, it is not referring to a hearing in the term that the district uses, discipline hearings. And so I did want to just clarify that if you look at the expulsion policies, there's continual reference to the hearing. And in regard to the discipline hearing procedures that are available, those are for expulsion hearings, or as we call them, discipline hearings, but they are only applicable for students who have been recommended for expulsion. And they are provided, a copy of that is provided to every parent in their packet up to 3 days before the hearing so that they have those available to them. And the update to the student handbook will also be made so that any changes that are applicable to that hearing process will be made in the student handbook as well. However, the use of the word hearing in the suspension policy could cause some confusion. And so it's just recommended to change that to a review. You'll see that that is in regard to a student who is suspended in the last 10 days of school, where the suspension could cost the student credit. And so that would be that there would be a review of that rather than a hearing, just to eliminate any confusion about the hearing procedures. Again, in our district, that is very, very rare. I'm not sure, to my knowledge, that it has happened because our administrators will work with students to provide them an opportunity after school, outside of school hours, or in a controlled environment to take their test so that they don't lose credit if they are in the last 10 days of school. So that's not something that we typically deal with, but in alignment with state statute, we would include that here. I'm happy to address some of the questions raised regarding written notification on the day of suspension. Just to clarify, that is a direct reflection of state statute, which requires us to notify parents with written notice on the date of the suspension. Suspensions typically take place on the day of the incident or the day that the administration has completed their investigation into the incident. And so there is not a significant delay in terms of the date that the suspension is effectuated and the actual suspension. And so written notice is required on the day of. Typically, that is done through hand delivery when the parent picks up the student from school for that suspension. However, we have also recently implemented the simple discipline system, which allows us to email parents that written notification. That was actually what precipitated the recommendation to switch it from mail to email, because the mail is very slow. And oftentimes parents don't receive the regular mail, and certainly not certified mail, until well after the suspension would have already concluded. And so we are switching to the email process. So most parents will receive a phone call letting them know that their student has been suspended and that they need to come pick them up from school. Then they will receive the handwritten notification at the school or an email from our simple discipline, including the referral and information about the suspension.
So the phone call is the day of.
Yes.
We always do the phone
So
call.
is there a reason we took it out then if we're doing that anyway? We are making, because I can't imagine a scenario where
Yeah, where
a
it's.
student is being suspended and a parent is not being called.
So that was actually a recommendation from the model policy to remove that. It can be included. I think I would recommend that it would say the principal or designee would make efforts to notify the parent by phone, because from time to time, our parents don't answer, don't update their numbers. But I mean, that was a change from the model policy.
Yeah, I would,
Because the statute really requires the written notification and not the.
if that's not too much, if we could include that, I think that would be beneficial.
Okay.
Jen, when the email goes out, is that through just like the general email, or is that going out through like the parent square?
So it goes out through simple discipline. It uses the information that a parent inputs into PowerSchool when they register their child, or when they update the information, their own contact information. So the parent inputs that and tells us who are the legal guardians who should be receiving that notification. Am I explaining this correctly? And then it goes straight into simple discipline. And so when administrators go to email that out, they just select the parent and it pulls that information from PowerSchool.
So what does that look like from me? Like, let's say my student's getting disciplined, does it say like a notification from Power School, or is that?
It will come as an email to your email address. It does not come through the,
Is it coming from like simple discipline? I'm just wondering, the reason why I'm trying to get at it is like, is this something that could potentially go to my junk mail? Because it's not, like, obviously I have Parent Square and Power School. Those are all like going to my inbox because I know those programs, I'm expecting to get stuff from them. But is this something that could be flagged?
I mean, I think that's hard to answer based on how different
I just
email
didn't-
settings, but I'll just say like I got a notification for one of my kids today about simple discipline and I've never gotten one and it came like right through and it says like your child received this and like it says simple discipline. So it's the first time I've got one and I didn't have any
I
problem.
don't know, I've just, yeah, I've never gotten one, so.
It was in it went to my personal email, so it wasn't flat, like it didn't go to spam or anything like that.
Little bit separate, but same vein, when a parent puts in an email at the beginning of the year, say, putting Power School, or they put that in, is there a verification in that system to make sure that email is good?
So, well, they get confirmation back email, but so when like parent gets confirmation email back that their registration was complete, if it is complete, like we get kickbacks in Parent Square, like it'll say 6 undeliverable email addresses. So schools will oftentimes follow up on those. We necessarily don't follow up on that, but like if a school sends one, they can confirm if it was an undeliverable email address.
Got it. And I'm assuming it would be the same thing from Simple Discipline. If they tried to send that and maybe it got kicked back, I'm assuming the admin would.
Since it's all pulled from Power School, they'll get it through Parent Square, Simple Discipline, everything. So they usually follow up on them because they get sick of getting the undeliverable ones. But again, that goes back to the response time of the parent, how quickly those can be.
yeah, and practically speaking, I've not really heard feedback. The parents were not aware, had not received the communication. So I think the system is generally.
So if a student does something at school and then they meet with the principal and it's decided that they're going to be suspended, I mean, doesn't the parent have to come and pick them up, or they aren't allowed to finish the day, or are they, how does that work? Like,
Typically, they wouldn't finish the day, but sometimes it depends on the time of day. I mean, I don't want to speak for administrators. Sometimes it's dependent on the time of day. Or it could be that an incident occurred the day before, the administrator is conducting the investigation today. And so it's very dependent on the time, the type of incident, that sort of thing, of what the suspension would be for.
As a teacher, I had where kids would stay or they would stay in the office or whatever and then
Yeah.
BIR, behavior improvement.
Yeah, so I mean, like, is there a certain like cutoff, like, let's say, you know, it's happens halfway through the day, do they pick them up and they have to go home, or?
Well, it depends on the infraction too.
Yes.
I mean, if
So
you
sometimes they.
say we have a fight, you know, that one, you're not gonna send that back to class.
Okay, so you go home and then ISS
But
the
if
next
it's-
day.
But if it's just my whatever tardy and it calls for a suspension, you know, yeah, here's your notification, you're suspended tomorrow, you go about your
Okay,
day.
yeah, yeah.
And usually we're told to make sure you get your stuff together before you leave, so you'll be out tomorrow. So depends on the infraction and what
That makes sense.
the severity of the consequences.
Then I know we had another recommendation was.
Yes. Thank you. So the other recommendation, which I apologize should have been included in what was uploaded to the board, is under the appeals process. After the, in the third paragraph, the first sentence would remain, and after the word response, the remainder of that is recommended for deletion. That appeal level to the board for suspensions is discretionary. And so I will leave that to the board for discussion, but if at the board's discretion, they do not care to hear suspensions of appeals of suspensions, then that language would be deleted entirely.
And kind of what we're going back to is obviously with an expulsion, that's something that we would consider hearing. When it comes to, like, to your point with suspensions, that could be a very slippery slope where we're, you know, the board is getting all these appeals for all these suspensions. At the end of the day, we trust our administration, we trust our district, and it does have a process to the superintendent, so I believe that's sufficient. And it was at the discretion, and like, I've not seen since I've been on the board, anytime we've heard a suspension appeal. And I don't think, I mean, Justin's been here much longer than I have. That's not a typical thing the board has ever done or I've heard of, so it didn't make sense to open that door, so.
To my knowledge, I've never seen a suspension come before the board. I guess kind of maybe the question, when we look at, we'll say the repercussions, I'm looking at Sparta, so I apologize for you're still looking at hers anyway. The difference between, say, a suspension and an expulsion. And then what does that look like, we'll say, on the student's quote unquote record? Because I think that's very different. And I think it's probably worth talking about, as well as maybe the different grade levels. Because the suspension for a third grader potentially has different ramifications than a suspension for a high school student. Am I saying all that correctly, thinking about that correctly?
Sure. So I mean, yes, different grade level can impact different way. I mean, when you're in a high school credit class, you're talking about seat time and all of those things. Huge difference between an expulsion and suspension. Obviously, we're taking a student out of school for the duration of the school year, up to 365 days, much bigger, missing content, instruction, possible retention, things like that. So of course, a suspension, our students need to be in class. So that, but overall academic career, there's a huge difference between a 1 to 3 day suspension, out of school versus an expulsion. And I will say, for the most part, certainly there are, seat time recovery, things like that, where it may be work outside of just making up work. But, there's just, it depends on the level of student. A lot of our elementary kids are a lot of doing hands-on things that the teacher will just pull those kids for, individually, as opposed to catching up outside of class for your older kids and things like that.
This is a weird random question, because I know we do seat time recovery. Could their suspension count towards their seat time still, or no?
No, because
Exactly.
that
So
counts
it's
as
like
a
part
school
of
day.
the- okay.
It's like they
Part
were
of the-
present for instruction, which is kind of what that seat time recovery is.
Okay.
Are they present for learning?
And expulsion also carries with, you lose credit. Like if you're at the high school, if you're expelled, you lose credit for your current classes. If you're expelled for the year, you lose credit for that.
Which does not happen. The only way that could happen in any way due to suspension is if the student had many suspensions, had a ton of seat time, and failed to make up that seat time in the time that was offered to them.
And I think going back to that's the why behind potentially why the board in theory shouldn't get involved in suspensions, because that's the difference. When you, a suspension versus
Yeah.
expulsion, we are in theory, I don't want to say it the wrong way, but we are denying a student the right to education in an expulsion, right?
Whether it's a hearing.
Versus a suspension, it is a defined period of time where they are not denied a right to an education. And I think that's why legally you have to have the ability to come to the board for an expulsion.
Correct. Yes, the statutes require the appeal to the board for expulsions or for involuntary transfers, but not for suspensions. That was just something.
Everybody good with that change?
All right, so if we are okay with the changes with JKD and JKDR.
Actually, Chrissy, so I just noticed too that so when I asked you about putting the phone thing back in, down below, it does say the principal or his or her designee should make an effort to make a personal contact with the parent, legal guardian of the student on the day of suspension. So
Yes.
since that is already there, then I think we do not
Where is
need,
that?
that is below, like, you see where it says it's crossed out, the principal notify the parent by.
Yeah,
Okay, then the next, there's a paragraph, and then below that in red,
yeah, okay.
see that? So I feel like that is actually the same thing.
Yeah,
So we don't really.
since those are both from the model policy, they
Well,
may
is
just
the-
guidance for that.
Yes.
Contact, like supposed to, is the email counting as that?
I don't feel like an email is personal contact.
That's what I don't know. That's what I'm wondering.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that there's a definition of what the personal contact would look like. I think a lot of districts are going to the email, and so that could be, I'm not sure.
But by
I
statute,
think
we may,
if,
I mean, we have to send them some sort of written correspondence.
so we have to give written notification, which we are moving to email being that written notification rather than mail. Because of what we discovered with mail and certified mail is that, yes, the students have already completed their suspension and returned to school, and then the parents get the written notification. And so they have always been required to give them written notification on the day of. It is just previous to this school year, that has been almost always hand delivery. However, with the advances with simple discipline, we have been able to switch that to being email rather than the hand delivery.
I mean, email to me is not, I don't know. It's not consistent.
So since that, the paragraph above that red addition states that we're going to send by mail, email, hand delivery, et cetera, could we just change personal contact to phone call or parent, notify the parent by phone? Because I mean, the email is already covered in the previous, but then that just clarifies that they will try to give them a call, make an effort.
Yeah, I think that would be fun.
I think that makes sense. Yeah.
Okay, so we will just change personal contact to phone call.
And then take out the part about go back and remove.
So make every effort to make a phone call to the parent or legal guardian of the student on the day of this.
Sure, we can set.
And just to be clear, personal contact isn't defined anywhere.
Yes,
So that's why I was like, that's confusing, what does that mean? Yeah.
yes, yes,
And obviously, again, it's on the day of suspension, because typically that takes place the day of the incident.
yes.
And then, sorry, going back to the other, removing basically the petition to the board.
Yes.
The paragraph under that one, right, so you did X that out as well. Just make sure everybody understands
Yes.
that.
Sorry, everything from after response
Gone.
through the appeals process. Yes, thank you. So do you want me to summarize the proposed changes? Because I was going to say that the proposal is that these two, the policy and the rule, continue to move forward for first reading tonight to stay in alignment with the other discipline policies that are moving forward. So if everybody is okay with that, I will summarize the proposed changes and then it will move forward to first reading tonight.
Does anyone have an objection to that?
Okay, so the proposed changes are in the policy, JKD, suspension of students, is the addition of the legal reference to IDA. And then in the administrative rule, JKDR, suspension of students, will be in the first paragraph, the next to last sentence, rather than hearing, it will be changed to review. In the next to last paragraph, the principal or his or her designee should make an effort to make a phone call to the parent or legal guardian of the student on the day of suspension. And then in the appeal section on the second page, everything after the first sentence of the third paragraph, the remainder of the appeals section will be deleted. So then if we are in agreement, I will move those forward for first reading tonight. They were uploaded in the board policy with the changes as so in the board policy committee section.
Would you update them in board docs prior to 6?
I can, yes, I can. Yes,
Just
these,
because I want, if we're gonna.
with the two proposed changes were already uploaded, but I will make the one additional change, actually two additional changes that we made. Yes, I will make those and re-upload it for first night.
Thank you.
Yes. That is all I have for today.
Oh, these are the ones on my list, but not to look at. And did you have anything, Miss?
No.
You good? Want to make sure. All right, well, you can do then.
We'll kill it. Can I make a comment? Or am I-
Yeah,
am I
yeah,
out of
yeah, you're
comment?
fine. No,
Am I
you're
out of
fine.
comment? Tell me.
Did you,
In public comment.
okay,
So, and I know I can't ask a question, so I don't know if I can pose it as a sentence and you can say that that's accurate or not. If we are removing the ability to petition to the board for suspensions, because it's more of a focus on the expulsions. What are the remedies when there's a situation where administrators have failed to follow policies? Principal, I'm just gonna lump as administrators together. School district employees have failed to follow the policies that you have written previously. And then also out there with South Carolina Code of Law. If I can no longer petition to the board for that, and I have proof. I've got multiple FOIA records that show that were failures across the board. And I'm not able to petition to the board. Then therefore, I'm either gonna perhaps follow a grievance procedure, work with South Carolina Department of Education with their ombudsman, or hire an attorney. Is that what I'm
so
hearing?
there was, I mean, you could speak, but there was an option to appeal to the
Yeah, so what you can
superintendent.
do, the designee would be this. So what we have in our curriculum department right now, we have a director of elementary, we have a director of secondary. So if there's something that they did not follow, those administrators would contact those people. So for example, if it's elementary, it would be Gary Ball Hodge. If it's somebody in the secondary, it'd be Maurice Cannon. And so then they look out and they do the evaluations of all the principals. And so if there's something that's not being done correctly and following procedure and policy,
then those people then will be then notified, and then they look at all of those concerns that you may have brought up. And so that's what does, that goes to that mechanism rather than going, they're my designee when they see those issues. So then they will work with you to try and remedy or resolve what has happened. And so if there needs to be something that needs to be changed in the process, they didn't follow the process in it, then that's when we take over and we do our due diligence of whether it's discipline or those things.
Because that's a personnel matter at the end of the day.
Correct.
Our superintendent is, he enforces the policy and he deals with the personnel, so it wouldn't be appropriate for the board to address that. And then that goes through that process.
That's typically.
The administrator, we're holding students accountable for their misconduct, which I agree they should be, but also if they're gonna be denied certain rights and processes, they need to be some kind of atonement for that, not just an answer of, we'll make note of this and we will train our staff. That's the answer I've been giving. So it hasn't resolved anything.
Right. So what we can't tell you what we're doing about actually start this level.
It was general level.
Right,
Yeah, so that has not worked for me, so. Some other two options would be maybe file grievance, work with a ombudsman, South Carolina Department of Education, or just get legal representation.
Yeah, if you've gone through, especially if you've gone through like with Carrie Bolhaj and Katie works with our curriculum department. And so those people do student concerns. And so that's where all our student concerns go, especially when we're talking about suspensions, those type of things, or anything that happens at school that's not an expulsion. And so that's what they typically deal with.
Thank you, Jeff. So, anything else? Y'all good? All right, we can adjourn. Thank you.